and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. I'm your host, where each week for about 6 years, twice weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have the enormous privilege on behalf of Franklin Covey to interview guests from all walks of life, all designed to make you a better leader, a better and more effective individual, whether you are a CEO or an executive level leader. Perhaps you're a first time or first level leader, or maybe you're even an individual contributor or in between careers. We all want to have better leadership skills and be a more effective person. So this podcast allows me, on behalf of Franklin Covey again, to have conversation with people from all walks of life. Sometimes they are CEOs themselves, other times they are business leaders, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, athletes, celebrities, academics, and even sometimes people that may not be a household name, but have done something remarkable or sometimes survived something consequential and have lived to tell about it and share about their lessons. Today's guest is William Vanderbloemen. He is the founder of an executive search firm aimed mainly at values and faith-based organizations, but has written this phenomenally practical leadership book called Be the Unicorn, 12 data-driven habits that separate the best leaders from the rest. William, welcome to On Leadership.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you having me. It's like first-time listener, or long-time listener, first-time guest. 7 Habits changed my life about 35 years ago, and I had my Franklin Covey planner when it was a brand new thing. It was just awesome. So it's really great to be with you guys.
Well, it's an honor to have you and spotlight you. I think you, like many tens of millions of people, had their lives and leadership touched by our co-founder, Dr. Stephen R. Covey. I was privileged to have worked under his leadership for the first 15 years of my career here prior to his passing about that number of years ago. And so we like to interview broad thought leaders on this podcast. Sometimes they are leadership experts, sometimes they are not. You, of course, fall right into the sweet zone of leadership today. You've written a book called Be the Unicorn. Its tagline, as I mentioned, is 12 data-driven habits that separate the best leaders from the rest. I've got 4 or 5 I'm going to pick out and have you dive a little bit deeper into. But William, why don't you rewind a little bit? You've had a pretty broad career in terms of your own leadership experience and your focus on values and faith-based organizations. You yourself have been a pastor. Why don't you rewind a couple of stints ago and reorient yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, well, thanks, Scott. I'll try and keep it brief. I think I'm a chronic entrepreneur. As a young guy, 8 or 9 years old, with newspaper routes, I was buying and acquiring neighboring routes and then changing the distribution and selling off the parts I didn't need. So I think it's just a chronic condition. And then went to college and did a great job of doing the things that you should not do while you're in college, but had a real awakening of faith in the middle of college that led to a stint in pastoral ministry in the Presbyterian Church for about 15 years. I was at a really large church for a long time, which I live in Texas. We're very careful not to use the word large unless we know that it is actually large. And then went into the corporate world, saw a succession. Actually, it was on the team that helped with it. I was kind of like the water boy for the team, for our CEO, and they used this thing called a search firm. I had never heard of such a thing, and it was so efficient and well done. And I thought, could we do that for the church? Because churches are terrible at finding pastors, at least in the world that I lived in. And so 16 years ago, I came home and told my wife we had 6 kids and a house we could barely afford. And I said, Adrian, I think I'm supposed to quit my job and start something new for churches. And she said, oh, that's because churches love new ideas, right? So, and it was the fall of 2008, which was just a brilliant time to quit your job and start something new. But we were very fortunate, and now 16 years later, we've completed about 3,000 searches. I've moved out of the role of actually executing searches and more to research, talking, doing books, kind of trying to provide some thought leadership behind what we're doing. And that led me to the research project that led to this book.
Adrian, I'm doing something wrong, because frequently I come home to my wife and say, I think I'm supposed to quit my job, and it never goes any further than that. What was the difference between your conversation? I'm a sufficiently religious guy, but my wife is smart.
She gets the credit for starting the company, because she should have told me, I love your dreams, I love your vision, go back to work. Instead, she said, let's give it a go. And we've been very fortunate.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you actually have 7 children together now, don't you?
The caboose came after starting the company. She's 14 years old, and 7 kids is really, really a fun thing. There's nothing better in my life than the family.
Yeah,
So
the word fun.
Since we started with this, can we help churches find their better leader? We've also branched out quite a bit into nonprofits, into faith-based schools, into privately held faith-based companies. Kind of like the Chick-fil-A's of the world is the easiest way to say it, if that makes sense. And so people who are driven by values and want to make sure that employees, especially top leaders, match their values, tend to look to us to try and help solve that puzzle.
I'm still stuck on the word fun that you used to describe having 7 children, because I have 3, and that word has not yet come into the vocabulary. Okay, not a parenting podcast yet. In your book, Be the Unicorn, you identify 12 habits, but I also would kind of call them archetypes, right? And we're not going to have time to review all 12 of them today, but I'm going to spend a short moment reviewing the 12, and I'm going to pitch you 3 or 4 that spoke to me from having my own 30-year career in the leadership industry. These are the 12 profiles, habits, I might call them archetypes. 1, you call the fast. Number 2 is the authentic. Number 3 is the agile. Number 4, the solver. Number 5, the anticipator. Number 6, the prepared. 7, the self-aware. 8, the curious. 9, the connected. 10, the likable. 11, the productive. 12, the purpose-driven. I'm guessing these habits, profiles, archetypes came from placing thousands and thousands of leaders in client organizations. Talk a little bit about the research you did. Did you have a larger list and you pared it down? And then we'll go deeper in a couple of these that I find especially relevant.
Yeah, well, we've been really blessed to grow quickly for a long time. And the one time we didn't grow quickly was 2020. And I think a lot of people have that story. None of our clients were hiring. We weren't a tech company, so it wasn't like Zoom or something. And it gave us some time. We actually dropped back and said, how can we serve people during the pandemic and help them? Like, I think we helped 1/3 of all faith-based organizations get their PPP money. So we just kind of pivoted, to use a word from back then. We also got to spend some time studying what we'd learned over the course of the history of the company. And we figured out in any search that we do, there'll be 1,000 people that might come under consideration. But as the funnel narrows and you get down to the creme de la creme, the last 5 or 6 candidates get a long format face-to-face interview it's not a wooden thing where it's exactly the same every time, but it follows a rhythm, and we keep very, very copious notes. So we said, while we were sitting around during the pandemic, what can we learn? We realized those finalist interviews, we've now done 30,000 of them. And we've tracked those people's careers. We've seen if they've gotten promoted. We've seen if they've really been kind of a standout. And they had. And then the next question was, well, how do we spot those kind of people quicker so we can be a better search firm? And we said, I wonder if we could distill any commonalities among these 30,000 individuals. Well, that's led to a long research project that yielded these 12 discoveries. And it's really interesting you say archetypes. I love that. That's really good. What it's not, though, is 12 traits. See, I thought, Scott, we would uncover that every person that was a standout was 6'4", quarterback of their team, or head cheerleader, or went to a great Ivy League school. It was none of that. It was habits that these unicorns, as we call them, practice. And while we thought we were looking for kind of a cheat code to spotting talent, what we discovered was, here's a pathway people can learn. A trait can't be learned, a habit can. So here are 12 habits that you can learn so that you can stand out in the crowd. And what was a very sort of self-absorbed project to get better at our job ended up being an amazing resource that we thought, gosh, everybody's nervous right now. They're nervous that they're getting squeezed out of the workforce because they're 5 generations in the workforce for the first time ever. They're worried that AI is going to come get their job. People are wondering how they can stand out, and we actually think we discovered the roadmap to that. 12 habits that if people will practice them, they will stand out of the crowd.
Well, as I've read your book and I listen more to you, they're really not archetypes because they're just that. You're saying that to differentiate yourself, to become a unicorn, you really want to learn all 12 of these.
Yeah, and we tried to keep it simple. We made the first habit that we named the easiest one to modify in your life so you can get some momentum. I think that's the change's best friend is some momentum, right? And if you can see some visible evidence, then you can get excited about making more efforts for change. And the interesting thing is these 12 habits are habits that the unicorns we interviewed all seem to have a strong bias toward, and everyone else on the planet does not. They're not impossible. They're not hard to do. They're just things we tend to not do. And we thought, oh my gosh, let's make this book very simple, very practical. No one's going to read this book and say, well, William's going to cure cancer. No. Putting the cookies on the bottom shelf, making it really easy for people to say, here's how I can modify my habits so that I will stand out in the crowd, whether that's in the workplace or as a student or as a parent, or even if you're like dating. How do you stand out in a crowded world? Here are the 12 things to hone in on.
William, one of my favorite top 5 interviews of this podcast was with Colin Cowie. Colin Cowie is a lifestyle expert. He's written numerous books. He's a renowned international event manager, planner, designer, curator. And he wrote a book for HarperCollins about customer service, really. And he mentioned, this is a guy that owns, a large global brand. When Oprah has an anniversary, Colin manages it, right? When a celebrity has a birthday party, they hire Colin, 1 million or 50 million, right? So when you're flying camels on 777s to your wedding, Colin is your guy. You are a sheik, obviously. And he mentioned that even in his business, who wins the business is the first person, the first vendor to return the phone call.
Right.
So even in his high-level boutique business, he has processes in place to where whether you're sending an email in or a text or a voicemail on Sunday at 2 a.m., someone's going to return your call within a matter of hours. In fact, you write on page 7 in your book in the habit called the fast. Here's what you write. There's no time like the present. Salespeople know better than anyone how important response time is. If you aren't there for your client now, you may as well not bother. The data is here to back this up. A 2021 study looked at over 5.7 million inbound leads and determined which were most likely to convert. The answer, the ones a rep responded to in less than 5 minutes. If those leads weren't attended to in the first 5 minutes, the chances of them converting plummeted by a factor of 8. I mean, this is a book that every chief revenue officer, every EVP of sales should be reading. Talk about why you wrote about response time in the first chapter, the habit called the fast.
Yeah, no, thanks, Scott. It may be because it's my favorite habit. When we started this company, it was me and a card table and my dog. In fact, Adrian said, I know QuickBooks. If you ever get a client, I'll send the invoice. That was it. So if I didn't go find business, we wouldn't eat. So if someone reached out to me and said, I'd like to talk to you about maybe doing some work for us, guess how quickly I got back to them? It was right away. 6 kids, right? Right away. And what I found over the years was people kept saying to me, William, it's unbelievable how quickly you get back to people. And so I started studying it and realizing most people just don't at all. And the people who stand out are the ones who get back right away, with not in an auto response, not in any kind of chat bot sort of thing, but like an intentional response, maybe even with a little color and context of the person writing in. Oh, Scott, the weather's getting ready to be beautiful in Utah. I hope it's good for you. Something personalized. It just, in my gut, was what I knew we had to do. And it led to us saying around the office, speed wins. speed wins. And we turned it into a core value called ridiculous responsiveness. And then we found the unicorns are the same way, and nearly everybody else is not. Another study that we saw that we did not publish in the book showed that if you have an inbound lead from like a HubSpot or one of these sort of fill out a form on the website and somebody will get back to you, if you answer that lead within 60 seconds of receiving it, you have a 98% chance of talking to that individual. If you wait 20 minutes, it drops to 60%. If you wait 24 hours, it drops to less than 1%. And the average response time of the companies interviewed was 42 hours. All you have to do is get back to people with some intention, and you will stand out in the crowd.
You called it ridiculous responsiveness. Is that what you named it in the firm?
That's our core value here. It's actually plastered on our wall.
How did you learn that? Was there a missed opportunity? Was there a mentor? How did that become ingrained in your brand as a person, as an owner, but also then as a cultural imperative in your search firm?
I remember when I was a young pastor, a long time ago, we were looking for a location because we were building the church, right? And a really great guy who used to be in the church but had left, we went out to lunch. I'm trying to get him to come back to the church. He said, that YMCA across the street from the property you've bought for the church, they don't use that thing on Sunday morning. I know the board chair. I'll give you his number. You should call him. I'm like, okay. So he wrote down the number and handed it to me. We got back to my office and he said to me, 5 minutes after we got back to the office, we're sitting chatting. He said, why haven't you called that guy yet? And I said, well, Todd, we're visiting right now. He said, no. I just gave you an opportunity. It's for the church I'm coming back to. Why don't you call him right now? Here's what I've learned, William. The first chance you have to respond is almost always the best one, and it will make you stand out. And that stuck with me. It just burned in me. And I could tell lots of long stories about how it's paid off in the end. And so there's that moment in time, but then there's also the moment of, oh my gosh, I've quit my job. I've got to start a business. I've got to feed all these children. We've got to pay for a house. I better get back to people right away. And as we've gotten more successful, it's tempting to forget that hunger and hustle. But we've decided, no, we're not going to forget. We're going to plaster it on the wall, and we're going to hire for it. And we're kind of mean the way we hire for it. Like, we'll text you at a weird hour and see if you get back to us right away. And if you do, that's great. And if you don't, you'd probably be really happy working somewhere else.
William, I think it's actually extreme and a great insight to remind everybody, especially as we perhaps move up the letterhead, higher up an organization, because you outsource things. And like me, I probably get 600 emails and messages a day across 5 social platforms, inbound. I'm a literary agent, and it's difficult to respond to everybody, but it's a differentiator, is it not? I used to agent a book for a Fortune 500 chairman of the board, and we were talking about a second version of his book, and he needed to unwind some relationships. He'd hired an editor and a writer to help him, and he needed to move forward without them for lots of ethical, wise reasons. These were tough conversations he needed to have. He needed to hang up the phone, and he needed to terminate 3 relationships. 15 minutes later, he called me back, and it was done. Not because he'd left voicemails, not because he was, a jackass. It was because he had, 3 5-minute conversations, one after another. And this is a guy that has impeccable character. Maybe it was 20 minutes later, and he said, okay, what's next? And it wasn't as if he had just dumped them. He just, to quote Brian Tracy, eat the frog. He did the tough thing. He actually made the call quickly. I think it's great to remind all of us, especially those who might feel like a little ensconced, or our brand or our profile allows us some latitude. You're saying, well, not if you're trying to feed 6 kids.
Well, what's interesting, Scott, we interviewed, I don't know if you remember the old eHarmony. It was kind of like the OG of all the dating apps that are out now. And we interviewed people there and asked them, what's the response time when you guys send, you might be interested in this person. They say, oh, it's horrible. It's not even just sales and marketing. It's like basic human relations. People don't get back to people. And the ones who do, and do it with some intention, will stand out like a unicorn.
Well, you have lit a fire under me. Number 2 habit is called the authentic. And I love this page 36 in the book. I won't quiz you on this. I'm going to read it to you because you write about authenticity red flags. And I want to read a couple of these and then have you riff on them, if you will. You write, there's authentic and then there's theatrics. Vulnerability can build bridges, but when it's not 100% authentic, it becomes manipulative. Ask yourself these 3 questions to veer into the histrionic. 1, am I leading with my pain for genuine reasons or because vulnerability is trendy and I know this could be a shortcut? That's profound. 2nd, is my, quote, authenticity making me a martyr? Very few people can actually own their problem. A counselor once told me, everyone gets through divorces, but the people that actually heal from them are the people who can name what part of the marriage failed was their fault. Very few people can do this, but the few that do recover quickly. And lastly, William, is what I am putting out into the world helpful? Being authentic doesn't mean airing your grievances left and right. It doesn't mean it gives you the right to be a jerk. Think before you speak. Riff a little more on the authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've noticed a change in leadership in the time that I've been leading different organizations. When I, was a young leader, it was lead from strength. Never let them see you sweat. And now the pendulum swung hard the other way. My neighbor, about 4 doors down, is an author named Brene Brown, and she's done so many good things in her writing. But part of what has made her so popular right now is that there is, I think, a trend where if you're not telling people about your trauma, if you're not telling people about your vulnerability, if you're not, then you don't count. And so people feel like they just have to lead with that because that's what's popular. I think that's absolutely untrue. I think people need to share authentically, not a facade of vulnerability or a facade of strength, but just be who you are. And those 3 questions they're like the express lane to getting to authenticity. I think the most important one is the ability to own your mistakes. I mean, when we interview people in an exec search, we say, hey, tell me about a time that you missed the mark or you failed or what, tell me about that. And if they talk about what happened to them, that's not very helpful to me. If they talk about what they have learned, or even better, if they say what I am still learning is that I need to hone in these skills because I was at fault in these 3, 4, 5 areas. That is an outstanding quality to develop. It's a habit that will get you noticed. You'll stand out like a unicorn because the way we are wired, and not to go all faith-based on you, but like go back to the beginning of the Hebrew scriptures, Adam and Eve mess up, and what's their answer? Adam says, well, the woman you gave me, she's the one that made me do this. And Eve said, well, the snake made me do it. Like from the beginning of time, we've been passing the buck. The people who can figure out their part of the conflict and own it, man, they stand out.
Great transition to another one of your 12 habits you call the self-aware, a concept I'm obsessed with, not just in teaching, but trying to live. You write, why hiring managers love the self-aware. The less anyone has to tell you, the smoother things run. Hiring managers appreciate people who think about themselves in the self-aware way people do. They're less likely to take up unnecessary space in meetings, waste your time, or make others uncomfortable. When given constructive and genuine feedback, they'll take it to heart. Self-aware people are invaluable for company culture. This is a profound but obvious statement. And then you go on to say tips for cultivating self-awareness at work. I love this next line. Ask people to be mindful of their habits in meetings. Do they talk over people? Do they talk for the sake of talking? I mean, it's such a great cultural imperative. William, how would you encourage a leader? Say you've got your current team, you're a leader, you got 4 or 5 people that report to you. Why don't you role play a meeting where you as the leader want people to be mindful of their habits in meetings because so few of us do?
Well, you should talk to my COO about that. She's far better than I am at these things. Scott, this self-awareness not to skirt the question, I'll come back, but self-awareness is the biggest blind spot of any of these 12 habits. We actually surveyed all 30,000 of the unicorns that we'd interviewed about a whole lot of things. And one of them was, hey, force rank these 12 habits. And what are you best at? What are you worst at? The far and away winner for last place, I'm terrible at this and need to work on it, self-awareness. And they're actually the ones who are pretty good at it. We then surveyed 250,000 people that we'd never interviewed, just general survey. And we hired researchers and all, so we did it the right way. Asked them a lot of questions. When it came to self-awareness, we asked this of all the habits. We said, are you below average, average, above average? 93% of everyone said, I'm above average at self-awareness. Now, I'm not a math major, but I'm fairly certain there is no group where 93% is above average. I think it hovers somewhere around 50. And I've thought about this so much, and I thought, why is this blind spot here? And I remembered the first time I heard my voice recorded. You remember that?
Oh dear, yes. Keep going.
It's just terrible. That's not me. I'd listen to me all day long. That doesn't sound a bit like me. Why don't you play the real me and not whoever that person? That's the blind spot. And if people can get aware of that, like little things like, if you're going to be mindful in a meeting, here's a great practice that I'm trying to employ. And when I try and help people with self-awareness, I'm always trying to frame it in terms of what I'm doing and what I'm learning, because I'm not going to go tell people to be self-aware. That's inherently counterproductive. But I'll tell people, here's a practice I have. And you think about this before we get into meetings. I'm trying to audit my speech every night. And here's what I ask myself. William, did you ask more questions today or give more directives? And I'm trying to lean more and more toward the asking of questions. And if you get that going in a meeting where people are asking thoughtful questions, man, the meeting goes better. And the other thing is, people won't ask dumb questions. If you frame it that way, they're going to sit and think and then ask a thoughtful question. It tightens the meeting up. It keeps it to working on the solution side of things rather than the problem side. And it tidies things up quite a bit. But I'm still learning this. I've got a long way to go in self-awareness. I do think we have arguably the best time in world history to work on self-awareness. You can find out your personality type, or you can find out where your strength finders are. We even built a software tool for the unicorns, so you can figure out how you stack up and what you need to work on. There's so many of these wildly helpful inventories you can take. It's also a season where it's okay to tell people you're going to counseling because you've got whatever issue you're dealing with. So it's never been an easier time to get to work on this, and it is the hardest of the habits. And when a leader begins to model that and show that they're still working on it, well, I think that starts to set a tone in the whole team. And all of a sudden, everything is a little cleaner and more efficient. We're not just filling time with babbling. People are more self-aware.
Probably my favorite chapter in the book, because you're absolutely right. All of us think we're more self-aware than we are. I'll tell you, I worked for the Franklin Covey Company for 25 years prior to my retirement, and then an additional 5, almost 5 now, as a podcast host and an advisor. So I would think I would be fairly steeped in our content, right, about how to be a highly effective person and leader, 30 years. And I was on the executive team for about a decade, and the CEO, the then CEO, now chairman, walked past me once on an executive team meeting and gave me some feedback. It was kind of the only feedback he gave me in almost a decade. And he said, I'm guessing after a particularly tough meeting with me, he said, Scott, you make too many declarative statements. And he went to the restroom. And it was profound for me, because I then debriefed it with him later on. And I started to better understand I was always first to raise my hand around the table. I was always the first to speak. I was the most persuasive because I was so focused on being right versus pursuing what was right. And so I love that you created this chapter in here. I'll tell you, William, of the, 300 plus people we've interviewed in this podcast, 400, I forgot the number, is a lot, 400. This is perhaps the best book book club book. Like, talk about a great book for a leadership team, or for that
Right.
matter, anyone to have a 12-week book club. Talk about how you're finding people are using this book on their teams and their organizations.
Well, we got a request to build the software tool that's kind of an assessment, and it's built not just for individuals, but for teams. And here's why the request. I want to know how we as a team or a company even, where are we good and what are we not good at? So we know what to attack first, second, third. So they take their assessment, and then all of a sudden they know, well, we're really good at speed, but we're not really good at authenticity. We know we're going to study that chapter first, then we're going to work on it. I think I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of schools are ordering this for their seniors. It was like a huge graduation gift this year. So anybody who's moving into the workforce, as a team, I'm hearing HR managers are buying this in bulk. You do books well and a lot better than I do, but we did a bulk discount sort of thing for the books. And man, I thought they'd get used once or twice, but I just got off the phone with an HR exec that wants 600 copies. We're going to put everybody through it. And we're going to go through as a course. We'll go just sequentially and work on one chapter for however long. We had a very large organization, probably 2,000 employees. I'd call that large anyway. And they spent 6 months working on the first chapter of the book. We're going to be more responsive. We're going to walk through this. I came in and talked to them and met with the board, and they said, just working on that one thing in a very focused effort as a team has made a huge difference in our ability to continue growth and user experience.
Well, I'm still fixated on ridiculous responsiveness, because that needs to be the mantra of the company that I co-own, Gray Miller. So, William, fantastic conversation. The book is Be the Unicorn, 12 data-driven habits that separate the best leaders from the rest. Your success is well-deserved. Delighted you came on today. Encourage everybody, read this book. I mean, this is actually a great book to buy your teenagers, people that are perhaps entering college, just out of work. If you want to build a brand that differentiates yourself in the marketplace right now, I mean, man, you have written the manual for that. William Vanderbloemen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, man. It's really great.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.